Welcome to the Front 7 podcast right here on YouTube. I am your host, Money Mike, and boy, how the NFL can change within a period of 2 days. It was on Thursday that we learned Teddy Bridgewater was going to be out for the year with a torn ACL. And then yesterday morning, the Minnesota Vikings went out and made a bold move and perhaps a season-changing move when they acquired Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Sam Bradford in a deal that sees the Philadelphia Eagles jumping back into the first round next year as they have acquired the Minnesota Vikings first-round pick, along with a conditional fourth-round pick in 2018 that very well could be higher than a fourth, as the Eagles were smart enough to know, and there's a lot of talk about the Minnesota Vikings being a Super Bowl contender, that conditional fourth rounder could go up to a second round pick in 2018 based off of these conditions. If the Minnesota Vikings go to the NFC Championship game, the fourth round pick automatically becomes a third round pick. If the Vikings were to win the Super Bowl with Sam Bradford after this trade, that fourth rounder becomes a second rounder in 2018. At the very minimum here, the Vikings are giving up a first and a fourth, possibly a first and a third, and even more possibility of a first and second rounder, with this being a 1-year deal of sorts as the Vikings wait on Teddy Bridgewater to come back for next year. I've seen a lot of people post about this and talk about it. I've gone through the YouTube videos, and it's amazing to me that a lot of people are calling this a bad trade. In fact, I am here to tell you completely different, because I think this just changed the Minnesota Vikings season of where they were going to be before they acquired Sam Bradford to where they're going to go with Sam Bradford. And I will give you a hindsight on this here. Now, a lot of people like myself, it was easy for me to sit there on Thursday night and say, what happens with the Minnesota Vikings without Teddy Bridgewater? Can Sean Hill do it? Is he capable enough to take over and lead the Vikings to the playoffs? And I think it was very easy to write them off with Sean Hill under center for the year. And truly, I think a lot of people started to write them off. Yes, they have Adrian Peterson. Yes, they have a very good defense. But this was not going to be enough with Sean Hill starting. So the Vikings had to go out and do something. And even after Vikings general manager Rick Spielman, now this is what he said on Thursday before this trade even happened on Saturday. This is what Rick Spielman had to say. The one thing we will not do is put our organization in a situation where it's going to inhibit us or hurt us going into the future, Spielman said. People are asking for some crazy things, and there were rumors actually going that teams were calling for the Vikings, calling to try to trade their quarterbacks to the Vikings. And I don't know what they're asking for, but according to Rick Spielman, they were asking for some crazy things. People think we're desperate. We're not going to do something in my estimation, or something like that in my estimation. In talking with Coach Zimmer and our ownership, that put us in a situation that jeopardizes the future of our franchise. Now, let's fast forward to Saturday morning. I was at work. I'm on my lunch break. I go into the break room. They had the college football game on. I believe it was the Michigan game. And it was the halftime show. And they were talking about the other college games. One of the things they talked about that popped up was the Vikings acquiring Sam Bradford. Now, immediately I was like, wow. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it when I first saw that. It was like, why would they do that? It's a 1-year rental. But then, in hindsight, you actually, once you actually have time to think about this, like I have, and you don't actually have a quick reaction to the trade, and you immediately call it a bad trade, after thinking about it, this was actually, and could be, in my opinion, the trade of the year. And I talked about it on Thursday. The Bridgewater injury, everything that happens with the NFL shapes up the story of the NFL season. And I talked about how the Bridgewater injury just all of a sudden took the Vikings story and just tailspinned it into a whole different story than what the Vikings actually want to have happen. So now, here we are. That story goes into a next chapter where Sam Bradford is now the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. And so let me address this here. Everybody says it's a one-year rental. Bridgewater will be back next year. Why give up a first? I give up a fourth, potential third, potential second for a guy who's injury prone. Well, folks, I'm not sure if you've been paying attention to the NFL in the last, 10 years, but this has really boiled down to the fact that the NFL is a win-now league. Coaches can no longer come in and have that 2-3 year period of getting the team together, getting the players they want on the team to build towards a playoff run ending to an eventual Super Bowl run. Coaches do not get the type of patience that they used to get unless, of course, you're the Cincinnati Bengals, who continue to give Marvin Lewis extension after extension after extension, despite the fact that he has yet to win the playoffs. Or you're Jeff Fisher and for some reason you survive. But outside of those two situations, coaches no longer have the time to build a team into their mold. Coaches must win now. Every year we see these same, new head coaches, players get these big 5-6 year contracts. But in hindsight, everybody in the NFL, players and coaches, and even general managers, they are playing on a 1 year, year-to-year contract. Because if you don't win now, if you don't get the team to where they should be after 1 year, the fans just want to run you out of town. The fans are calling for your head. Remember this. A couple years ago, it was Ron Rivera's second season with the Panthers. They didn't really get off. They weren't really where they wanted to be with him, and a lot of fans in Carolina were calling for his head. And this was only in his second season. It was only in his second season that fans and even the media was calling for his head, just because he had not gotten the team to win right away. Last year, where were the Panthers? 15-1 in the Super Bowl. Now, they lost the Super Bowl, but would all of what happened last year, the almost perfect season, the Super Bowl appearance, would that have happened if the Panthers had decided, you know what, we're going to cave into everybody saying we should fire Ron Rivera, and we're going to blow this whole thing and bring in a new coach and start all over again? Because that's what you do. When teams bring in new head coaches, new general managers, it's starting over. So you have situations where teams are, or when you bring a guy in and let's say he runs a different scheme, all of a sudden you have players out of place. You're trying to bring in players that fit the new scheme. So you're essentially blowing everything up. Panthers were smart. They did not listen to the criticism that Ron Rivera was getting, and it's paid off. So for the Vikings here, coming off a playoff run, they won the NFC North last year. And no, by the way, they had this brand new fancy stadium that they have to sell tickets for. So I don't think fans are going to go to a game in Minnesota where Sean Hill is the starting quarterback. No offense. The Vikings had to do something. It's a win-now league. They just could not sit back with Sean Hill and go, yeah, we'll just kind of tank the season and, whatever happens, happens, and we'll just wait for Bridgewater to come back next year, and then we'll make a Super Bowl run. The Vikings had a 2016 season to think about, folks. They couldn't wait for next year. They can't wait. They had to make a move now in order to compete and win in 2016. Not in 2017, not 2018. The Vikings have to win now. And that's exactly why they did this trade. So, you can say all you want, this is a bad trade, but in hindsight, again, like I said, and I keep using the word hindsight, it's a win now league. The Vikings have to win now. They had to think about the season that starts next Sunday. And you can't wait, because if they had a bad year, it's easy to say, well, yeah, okay, well, they were without Teddy Bridgewater, but again, what were they going to do for 2016? They were just going to wait. I mean, they can't tank. I mean, well, sure, they could tank the season, but I mean, with a team that's ready to win now, and Adrian Peterson getting up there, they had to do something drastic, and a lot of people call it a desperate move, but it's actually going to end up being the best trade of the year. And I truly believe that because of that, the Minnesota Vikings are back on the path of being a Super Bowl contender. I truly believe now, and I'm going to be doing a lot of prediction videos coming up this week, leading into Thursday's game between the Panthers and the Broncos. And I truly believe that this move wins the NFC North for the Minnesota Vikings 2 years in a row. They go to the playoffs, and it's quite possible they do make a playoff run towards Super Bowl 51 in Houston because of this move and with Sam Bradford. Now, before I go, and you all can leave your comments about how this is a bad trade, even though I just told you that the Vikings had to think about this season and they could not just wait around. They couldn't just wait around for next year. They had to do something now, and trying to get that to you guys to understand that this is a win now league. And I know you guys are going to comment, oh, well, still not worth it. He's injury prone. First off, and I should have done this before I started the show, but let me go ahead and look at the offensive line of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, a lot of people say, oh, he's going to get hurt, right? I don't know about that, because when you look at their offensive line is more geared, more ready to protect him and to keep him healthy more than what the Eagles' offensive line would have done. The Eagles' offensive line is in shatters. I mean, they have Lane Johnson suspended. Their O-line was already in question as it was. Now Lane Johnson is suspended for 4 games. So, now let's go ahead and look at the offensive line of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Matt Khalil is the weak spot on that offensive line. He hasn't really turned into the Joe Thomas that everybody thought he would be. I think everybody, when they drafted him in 2012, I think a lot of people put the Joe Thomas label on Matt Khalil, and he just hasn't really lived up to that. And when you look at the offensive line this year, what they've done is unbelievable. They've brought in Alex Boone from San Francisco. They've also brought in Andre Smith from the Cincinnati Bengals at right tackle to shore up the right side. And then they have Joe Berger under center, who they liked enough to release their old starting center, John Sullivan. So when you look at Matt Khalil, Alex Boone, Joe Berger, Brendan Fusco, and Andre Smith, the Vikings offensive line is actually more prepared to keep Sam Bradford upright than, say, the Eagles offensive line. So he's already going into a situation where it's a great defense. You have Adrian Peterson to carry the ball to carry the ball and hand the ball off to, just like he did in Oklahoma. So it's a little Oklahoma reunion. But now the offensive line is more set to protect him, keep him upright for the year, and to ensure that he does not get injured. Now let me bring you these stats here. If you look at the 2015 season, Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater actually had very similar statistics when you look at it from a stat standpoint. So the Vikings really aren't losing anything. They're not gaining anything either. It's about the same. And I'll tell you why. Last year, for the Philadelphia Eagles, Sam Bradford only played in 14 games. But in those 14 games, throughout the whole year, he ended the season 3,725 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. Now, you can say, well, that's pretty bad, but he also still ended up with a 65% completion percentage to close out the year. So that's pretty damn good for only playing in 14 games. Now, he missed 2 games. Now, Teddy Bridgewater from last year, he had a 65.3 completion percentage to close the year. So it's only 0.3% higher than Sam Bradford. He had 3,231 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. He had a quarterback rating of 88.7. Sam Bradford quarterback rating 86.4. The Vikings are not losing anything here. They're basically getting the same player with very similar stats. Now, yes, Sam Bradford, he can't run, he can't do those kind of things that Teddy Bridgewater can do. But, as I said, with the offensive line more geared to keep him upright, the Vikings have a better chance of Sam Bradford actually maybe throwing for more than over 4,000 yards and getting them into the playoffs and having a deep playoff run. And for retrospective and, comparison, Peyton Manning in his last year of the NFL, he only threw for 2,249 yards with only 9 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. So both Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater statistically had a better year than Peyton Manning did in his final year. And he took the Broncos to the Super Bowl. Even though you can argue that Von Miller and the defense took the Broncos to the Super Bowl. But it's a quarterback-driven league, so the quarterback's going to get the credit. So who's to say that Sam Bradford can't do the same for the Minnesota Vikings? That's going to be very interesting to find out what happens this season. I truly believe that this was the game-changing trade of the year. The trade of the year. Sam Bradford is now a Minnesota Viking, and hopefully he starts next Sunday against the Tennessee Titans, even though there is some weird talk about how it might be Shaun Hill starting next week. Tell me below in the comments, what do you think of the Sam Bradford trade? Do you still believe this is a bad trade, despite the fact, after everything I told you, of how good and smart of a trade this is, and how I believe this is the trade of the year, that you still think it's a bad trade? Let me know in the comments below, and I will have my season preview show Wednesday night. I will pretty much have it ready to go, and make sure you subscribe to my channel for the 2016 season, as I will have a lot of videos for the 2016 season. We're going to have a lot to talk about. Who goes to Houston? I will have my season preview and a predictions video coming up before Thursday. Most likely the season preview will be Wednesday. My prediction videos will be scattered throughout the week leading up to Thursday, and it will be division by division. So make sure you subscribe to my channel for all that. And also don't forget the Everything Else podcast as well. I've been your host, Money Mike. And I will see you guys Wednesday, probably sooner, with my prediction videos coming up on the next Front 7 podcast.